Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Thank you for being here. I am excited to show you this layout that I made using the Shimmerz September Color Kitz Collection. On my mat, you can see I have a whole bunch of flowers. I fussy cut all of these flowers from one sheet of paper, and I had enough flowers to create this layout. I used them on another layout, and I still have quite a few left. I love the way the flowers are all slightly different shades, and I also like the way there are lots of leaves and branches mixed in with them. Right now, I'm inking the edges of all of the flowers. I use a Ranger Archival ink called Mulberry, and I'm trying to just ink the flowers with that color, and then I will come back in with some Staz On Ink in Cactus Green, and I'll ink the leaves with the Cactus Green. I love the Shimmerz papers because they have kind of a laminated or shiny finishing on them. You can see to the left of my mat, there's a sheet of paper and you can see the light is shining on it and there's a sheen to it. And I like to use the archival ink with these papers because it has that coating on it. I want to make sure that the inks don't rub off. For this layout, I'm using these two photos of my daughters. They are square photos that measure 3 3/4 inches. And they're kind of silly pictures. Sometimes they can get a little funny when I am taking pictures of them. And a lot of times I get a lot of crazy pictures, but then I get some really nice ones too. And these are ones that were just kind of silly, but there was something about them that I really liked. So I decided that I would include them in this layout. So I mounted the photos on some white cardstock and then again on the green striped paper. To the left-hand side of the layout, I have a strip of pink paper, and then I use an EK Success scalloped punch, and I punch that large scalloped border, and that's going to be along the edge of the pink pattern paper. And now I'm using some paints to create a mixed media background. This is a piece of 120-pound gessoed smooth white cardstock. And I'm adding this beautiful color from the kit, a Coloringz called In Deep. I use my favorite packaging technique to spread the paint around the background. And I know that I want this color to be visible on all sides of the photos. I don't usually work with these bold colors in the background. I think, try to pick the more subtle colors for the background. But I took a chance and I used this really bright color and I ended up really loving it. So I think I'm going to try experimenting with some bolder colors in my backgrounds. One of the wonderful things about the color kits is that the paints are coordinated with the papers and the embellishments. So normally, if I put this blue in the background, I would want to have some other embellishments on the page that were also blue. And I don't have to think about that too much because I know that there are going to be some other elements in the kit that are blue to help me balance out the background. And I try to use that idea of having whatever color I have in the background in another part of the layout. That way I feel like everything looks cohesive. It's not a hard, fast rule. There are times that I don't use the same color in the background anywhere else on my layout, but I do think that that's one thing that I do most of the time. I think that it does help to bring all the elements in the layout together. That's just my opinion. You can see that I've decided to make a secondary cluster in the upper left-hand corner. And this is how my brain has been thinking lately. I have been moving my photos all around the page, but I've been making a big photo cluster and then having another smaller cluster somewhere else on the layout. And I've been having fun trying this out. In the past, I used to put most of my photos in the center of the page, and now I'm doing a lot of experimenting with moving those photos into all areas of the layout. However, I still make plenty of layouts with the photos in the center of the page. I added a few layers of the blue color because I wanted it to be intense. I also wanted to make sure that there was some variation in the color. Of course, you know that a lot of this color is going to get covered up, but I never work thinking about that. I always try to make sure that the background has a lot of variation and a lot of interest to it, and then whatever gets covered up gets covered up. I added lots of splatters once I had dried the background. If you add splatters while the background is wet, the splatters will be less noticeable, and sometimes that's the effect that I'm going for. Most of the time, though, I like to dry the entire background, and then that way the splatters won't mix in with the wet paint that's there. They will sit on top of the paper, and I kind of like that definition in the splatters. The September kit is very crisp and clean. I love the combination of reds and pinks and blues. And so I was thinking that adding some stenciling to this big area of color would add a little bit more of a crisp look to this large area of paint. Not that I don't add stenciling to a lot of my layouts, but I really wanted there to be a lot of white mixed in with the color. To add the modeling paste, I added some Master's Touch modeling paste from Hobby Lobby, and I think I've been calling it Master's Choice for about a year or two. I'm just realizing now that it's called Master's Touch. And I mix that together with some white thick body acrylic paint, also from Hobby Lobby, also Master's Touch. And I use a stencil from Echo Park. It's called Fall Floral. I thought that this was a nice, very delicate pattern, and I wanted something that was, like I said, kind of crisp looking, nothing too grungy. And so I added some to the large area of color and then some to the smaller one as well. And then once the background was dry, I added some ATG adhesive to the back of my photos. Isn't that a pretty print that's on the back of the green paper? I really like that too. And now once again, I'm using that mulberry archival ink, and I'm inking the edge of this strip of paper. And then I attach that border down to the strip of paper, or rather I attach the strip of paper down to the border, and then I attach it down to the left-hand side of my layout. And then next, I'm going to work on my title. I use some dies that I had in my stash. They were inexpensive dies that I got probably on eBay a while back. They're nice though. They are stitched letters, and I cut them out in watercolor paper, and I also cut them out in regular white cardstock. The white cardstock letters are at the top of my mat. And once again, I'm using the Coloringz called In Deep to color all of those letters with some blue. I wanted to have some of this blue on the left-hand side of the layout, as well as where I had already put it on the right-hand side. And I applied the paint to each of the letters 2 or 3 times just to make sure there was even coverage and to make sure that the color blue was as intense as the color of the blue that I put on the background. In case you're wondering, the watercolor paper that I used is a cold press watercolor paper, very inexpensive, from Hobby Lobby. I bought a little tiny pad of it, and I've been using that pad for quite a long time because I only really use it when I am making die cuts that I know I'm going to color with Shimmerz Paints. After adding several layers of color, I allowed the letters to dry. In the meantime, I'm inking up some of the elements I'm going to include on the page. I didn't ink the blue flowers that you see on the mat. I'm going to include those as is on the layout. But I did want to ink the edges of some of the pink flowers I'm going to use. I also die cut some branches out of one of the pink papers in the kit, and I inked the edges of those branches too. And I just used whatever ink was left on my dauber. I have daubers in all different colors, and sometimes if I'm not inking too many things, I'll just use whatever ink is on there. Now I'm assembling the title. I'm offsetting the white letters with the blue letters, putting the white letters behind, and then just slightly offsetting the blue ones and gluing those on top. And this gives the letters a little bit more interest. It adds a little bit of dimension to them, and it also makes them contrast with the background a little bit more. Now I'm ready to add those flowers to the layout. I'm planning on adding them all around my photos. I have lots and lots of flowers, but I didn't want to overdo it. So I decided to add them in 3 different spots near the photos, and then also add some to that small cluster on the left-hand side of the page. I was also considering adding some flowers near where I'm going to have the title on the background, and I do end up adding some flowers, but not these larger flowers. I spelled out good times using my letters, and I'm going to attach all those letters down to the layout. I usually like to attach letters down off camera just because it takes me a long time to get them lined up really nicely, but I wanted to let you know that I do often use a T-square in order to help me, just to make sure that I have them straight, because I do not have a good eye for straight at all, so the ruler is really helpful in that situation. So I arranged my flowers, and now I'm using some adhesive to attach them down. I know that I'm happy with the way that they look, and I like the way they're clustered around the photos. I have the cluster on the bottom that's a little bit smaller than the cluster that's on the left-hand side of the photos, and I like to try to vary the size of the clusters even just a little bit. I'm also including those blue flowers on the layout, and I'm trying to spread those around the layout. I had enough blue flowers to add them to each of the clusters. I liked the way that blue color looked right next to the red flowers. I also included one of the dots that comes in the kit. I love those dots. They are shiny, and I always like to add items to my layouts that are made of different materials, so I always think that's a really nice accent. So I placed this dot that has the daisy on it to the left of my photo, and I really like it there, but I ended up finding a better spot for it, so I do move it around in a little while. And then I also add the pink flowers to the clusters. At first I thought that I only had 2 flowers, so I put one of the flowers on the top cluster and one on the left, but then later on I was going through all of the embellishments and I realized there was a 3rd pink flower, so I ended up adding a 3rd flower to the cluster on the lower right hand corner. Right now there are 2 little very, very tiny pink flowers there, but they're so small they're kind of hard to see. I trimmed the bud off of the flowers that were in that smaller cluster because I didn't want that bud to touch the bud or any part of the other cluster that's right underneath it. I wanted there to be at least a little bit of white space underneath, and I thought that I could always tuck it back into the cluster if I wanted to. But then instead, I started adding those branches that I had die cut from a pink pattern paper in the kit, and I started tucking those into the clusters too. I really don't know anything about flowers, but I do know that I really like the combination of larger flowers and medium flowers and then smaller flowers, either tiny flowers on stems or these kinds of branches. I just think that the combination of the different sizes makes the clusters look pretty. And I know almost nothing about the names of flowers. I know all of the common ones, but I really don't have a lot of knowledge. But I do really like having florals on my layouts. It's probably something I should try to learn a little bit more about. I placed a flower between the 2 words of the title, and I like the way that that looks there, but what I didn't like was that that flower was right next to the flower that's on the dot, and they're at the same height, and I just didn't like the way that that looked, so I do end up switching that. Right now I'm using that same piece of paper that I used for the strip of paper on the left and for those die cut branches, and I'm making some photo corners. And I use the punch off to the right. That's an EK Success punch. I also punched out a tab. I found a punch at this bargain store for, it was either $1 or $2, and I wasn't sure if I should buy it, and I ended up just grabbing it. And when I got home, I realized it made these really great tabs, so I punched one of those out, and that's going to the right of the top photo. I decided to move the dot to between the 2 words of my title, and then I took the flower that I had there and I worked that into the cluster that I took the dot from. I didn't have photo corners in all of the corners that are visible, and I decided to go back and add a couple more until I had photo corners in each of the corners. So I once again inked the edges of those, and then I used some enamel dots. They're probably Bow Bunny enamel dots, but sometimes I will mix my dots in the packages, so I'm not 100% sure. But there's some very, very tiny pale pink enamel dots that match really well with this pink paper that is on the layout. And then I used my gel glue and I went around the layout and made sure all of the branches and any other embellishments that weren't attached down were glued down to the background. Then I use my date stamp and I stamp the date, and this layout is complete. And here are just a couple of close-ups. When you place an order with Shimmerz Paints, and this kit is still available as of the day that this video is going out, if you use my name in the comments, you'll receive a free gift. I put the links to the Shimmerz website and also to the Color Kitz Collection in the description box. I hope you have a fantastic day and hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.